Welcome to our podcast. What does it mean to be mature? Welcome to today's podcast, maturity. It's one of those words people throw around all the time, like a badge of honor or a measuring stick. Be mature, act mature. That's not very mature of you. But what does it actually mean? Is it paying your bills on time? Holding down a job? Knowing how to cook something other than instant noodles? A lot of people think maturity is about age. The older you get, the more mature you become. Simple, right? Except we all know a few grown adults who act like toddlers when things don't go their way. And we've met teenagers who carry themselves like they've lived 100 lifetimes. So clearly, it's not about the number of candles on your birthday cake. Some say maturity is about responsibility, being accountable for your actions, taking care of yourself, doing what needs to be done even when you don't feel like it. And yeah, that's part of it. But responsibility without self-awareness is just obligation. It's just going through the motions, checking off boxes without really understanding why. Then there's emotional maturity, which might be the trickiest of them all. It's easy to assume that if you don't cry at movies or get angry in traffic, you're emotionally mature. But real maturity isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about understanding them. It's about knowing when to speak and when to listen, when to hold on, and when to let go. It's being able to sit with discomfort instead of running from it, to admit when you're wrong instead of doubling down on your mistakes. And maybe the hardest part? Maturity isn't something you arrive at. Like a finish line you cross where someone hands you a trophy and says, "Congratulations, you're now officially a mature person." It's not a destination, it's a process, a constant becoming, because every time you think you've figured it all out, life has a way of humbling you, of handing you a new lesson wrapped in an experience you never saw coming. So maybe maturity isn't about what you know, but how willing you are to keep learning. Maybe it's not about having all the answers, but about asking better questions. Maybe it's about realizing that strength isn't about never needing help, but knowing when to ask for it. And the most ironic part? The more mature you become, the less you feel the need to prove it. Maturity has a way of sneaking up on you. It doesn't arrive with a grand announcement or a defining moment where everything suddenly clicks into place. More often than not, it's quiet, subtle. It shows up in the way you react to things that used to set you off, in the way you stop expecting life to be fair, in the way you learn to sit with uncertainty instead of demanding immediate answers. It's also not always comfortable. Growth rarely is. Sometimes, maturity means walking away from people you once thought would always be in your life, not because you don't care, but because you finally understand that caring isn't enough to keep something healthy. It means accepting that some conversations will never happen, some apologies will never come, and some chapters will end without closure. And instead of resenting that, you learn to make peace with it. There's a kind of maturity that comes from learning what deserves your energy. Not every battle is worth fighting. Not every opinion needs to be corrected, and not every invitation needs to be accepted. You stop proving yourself to people who have already made up their minds about you. You stop chasing validation in places that leave you empty. You realize that being misunderstood is a small price to pay for staying true to yourself. And then there's another layer to it, learning that maturity isn't about having control over everything. In fact, the more you grow, the more you see how little control you actually have. Plans fall apart. People change. Life takes unexpected turns. The mature response isn't to resist reality, but to adapt to it. To let go of the illusion that if you just try hard enough, you can make everything go the way you want. But perhaps one of the biggest signs of maturity is learning how to hold contradictions. To accept that two things can be true at once. That you can love someone deeply and still walk away from them. That you can be grateful for an experience while also acknowledging that it hurt you. That you can be confident and still have moments of doubt. Immaturity demands black and white. Maturity understands the shades of gray. And maybe, at its core, maturity is just the ability to live with reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. Maturity has a way of humbling you. When you're younger, you think it's about being right, about having the sharpest argument, the last word, the upper hand. But the older you get, the more you realize that being right is often overrated, that silence can be more powerful than a perfect response. That wisdom isn't in proving a point, but in knowing when to let something go. It also changes the way you see time. There's a phase in life when you think you have all the time in the world, time to fix things later, to chase dreams later, to love people later. Then one day, you wake up and realize that later isn't guaranteed. And maturity is knowing that waiting for the perfect moment is just another way of wasting time. There's a kind of maturity that comes when you stop needing everything to have a clear purpose. Not every relationship is meant to last. Not every job needs to be your passion. Not every experience has to teach you something profound. Some things just are. And learning to accept that, without forcing meaning onto everything, is its own kind of growth. And then there's the way maturity reshapes your relationship with yourself. You start to see that self-respect is quieter than you expected. It's not about dramatic declarations or proving people wrong. It's in the small, consistent choices you make every day. The way you set boundaries without guilt. The way you stop making excuses for people who keep hurting you. The way you trust yourself enough to walk away from situations that no longer align with who you're becoming. But maybe one of the hardest lessons maturity teaches you is that some things won't be fixed. Some wounds don't fully heal. And learning to live with that, to carry your scars without letting them define you, is its own form of strength. And in the end, maybe maturity is just the quiet realization that life doesn't owe you anything. That happiness isn't something you wait for, but something you build. That no one is coming to save you, but that's okay. Because you've finally learned how to show up for yourself. Maturity also changes the way you deal with failure. When you're younger, failure feels like a dead end. Like proof that you're not good enough. But as you grow, you start to see it differently. It's not a sign to stop. It's just feedback. A redirection, not a rejection. You stop taking it so personally because you realize that everyone fails. And the people who succeed are just the ones who didn't. Let failure be the final word. You also start to understand that not everything in life has to be perfect to be good. There was a time when you thought happiness would only come when everything was just right. When you had the perfect job, the perfect relationship, the perfect life. But then you realize that life is always a little messy. There's always something unfinished, always something that could be better, and maturity is finding joy anyway. Not waiting for things to be flawless before you allow yourself to be happy. It also teaches you that you don't have to win every argument. That sometimes, the smartest thing you can do is let people believe what they want. Not because you don't care, but because peace is more valuable than being right. You learn that some battles aren't worth fighting, and that walking away isn't losing. It's choosing where your energy goes. And then there's the way maturity reshapes how you see other people. When you're younger, it's easy to judge, to label people quickly, to assume you know their story. But as you grow, you start to realize how much you don't know. That the person who seems rude might just be exhausted. That the friend who drifted away might be struggling with something they don't know how to talk about. That most of the time, people aren't trying to hurt you. They're just caught up in their own battles. And maturity is giving grace even when you don't understand. It also teaches you patience, not just with others, but with yourself. You stop expecting to have it all figured out by a certain age. You stop thinking you should be further along, or that there's something wrong with you because your path doesn't look like everyone else's. You realize that growth isn't linear, that healing takes time, and that sometimes the best thing you can do is just keep showing up, one day at a time. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and give it a thumbs up. Also, feel free to share your thoughts or any questions you have in the comments below.